Hey guys, welcome to Coding After 30. In this video, we're going to do a little bit of JavaScript. I'm going to show you how to loop through an array and generate content via JavaScript in your HTML. Now, by all means, I'm not an expert. I'm still learning just like you guys, but I feel by sharing with you guys what I learned, not only will help me to get better at teaching and understanding what I'm doing, but it also will help you. And as always, I always show some of the articles that I read or used to help me accomplish what I'm trying to do. So I hope you enjoyed this video, so let's jump into it. By the way, my name is Paul, and on this channel I talk about switching careers into web development late in life. If this is something that interests you, consider subscribing. Alright guys, here we are. So let's jump right into it. So here's an example website that someone is building, and it looks beautiful. I really like the clean design. It's pretty cool. And currently, all the products and all the sections, they're hard-coded inside the HTML. So what we want to do is we want to be able to generate this content dynamically. Maybe this comes from an API, and we want to collect that data and use JavaScript to insert it programmatically. This is important because you want to have a dynamic website. You don't want to go inside your website and have to change the hard-coded information. You want to have a backend where you have a list of items and it just automatically gets generated in your website. So before I showed you my solution, you have to understand that I'm just like you, still learning. So the most important resource you have is the ability to find stuff in amazing Google. So what I did is I actually searched two things. The first one is inserting HTML into a div. And the first article I found was on Stack Overflow. So if you scroll down here, we could see that what we want to do is we want to target an element, which we could get by getElementById, and then we want to insert whatever we want into it using innerHTML. So that's a great start. So I knew that we need to be able to take an array of objects that we get and iterate through them and insert it into our HTML. So I looked up two different ways to create HTML from an array of data. And as you could see here, they have two different methods using for each, and as we scroll down, using array.map method with array.join. And that's the method I ended up using. So by using array.map, we will return an array of listed items. And what we need to do, because we want to pass a complete string into innerHTML, we use the array.join method to combine everything together. And we'll look more into this in detail. But the point that I want to make here is that whenever you're stuck, if you identify what you want to do, you should be Googling and you should be looking for the answers yourself. The reason I say this because big part of programming is being able to find the solutions on your own. I do understand though, when you're starting out, sometimes we don't know what those solutions are, and that's okay. But I just want to make sure that you always have it as a habit of always striving to look for answers yourself. So let's jump into the code. So as you guys could see, we have the HTML section here that displays this information. But if you look here, I have test here, but it's displaying the data. What's going on? Well, I already created the code to be able to generate this HTML dynamically. So as we looked at our script.js file, we could see the steps that I use. Number one is to make sure we have some sort of data, and the data that we have here is the fake data that we're pretending to get from an API. In the future videos, I'll show you how to use fetch API to get data, but for now, to keep things simple, I just hard-coded here. And as you could see, we have an array of objects, and each object contains image URL, name, and price. And this is reflected here. We have watermelon and the price is $6.25. If we go to pineapples, we see pineapples and the price is $5.25. So what we're doing is we're taking this data and we're iterating through it and inserting it into our HTML. Now the second step here is to set up an HTML template that displays these individual cards. So as I open up here, and now this is the HTML she wrote. The only thing that I did is I created a function that takes an item as an argument. And you could see here, we use the string literal, so we're able to insert our items like item.imageURL, item.name, and item.price into our HTML. And as you can see here, if I delete this and replace it with a bunch of X's, when I rerun, you will see that that is being generated by that template. Now, I don't want to hard code this item here. That's why instead we refer to the item that we're passing, and we want the price here. So here's our template, and don't worry if this is not making sense right now. We'll do a simpler example in just a little bit in CodePen. Now, the third step is to be able to create a function that, number one, will target the div in the HTML that we want, and number two, will insert after iterating or mapping through the items into HTML. So as we could see here, I have this div which has all products, and that's the ID I gave. And as you could see, this correlates with us targeting via getElementById, targeting all products div and saving it in our products container. So basically what we're going to do, we're going to insert via innerHTML our HTML template. And the final step here, we are creating an HTML variable, and what we're doing is we're mapping through our items, and every time we map an item, for each item we add this above template into this variable. And like I said before, if we don't add the join, what it returns an array of 4 different HTML elements. But what we want to do is we want to convert it to a string. So we use this join method, convert it to a string, and save it in this innerHTML. And the final step, the last step, is we call this method, this function that we created above, we call it below, and we pass our data from above here. And just quick review before we create our own example in CodePen. As you could see here, we have our data. Step 2, we created a template, and we're able to insert those items into our template. Number 3, we created a function that targets the div where we want to insert the elements, and then we iterate via map and join to insert that HTML inside that div. And we call this function on the bottom. And again, you could always refer to the 2 articles that talk about the methods we use to iterate through an array of objects so we could insert HTML, and then also the previous article where we saw how to insert HTML into a div using innerHTML. So Google is your friend. Alright guys, here we are. Now we're going to create our own example. We're only going to focus on the HTML and CSS. The first thing we're going to do is just create a div, and this is the div where we're going to insert our items into. Alright, so here we go. We created our div. Items will go here. Now what we want to do, we want to be able to select this div via JavaScript. So in order to make it easy for us, we're going to give it an ID. So now we have an ID of items, so let's target it with our JavaScript. And we're going to use document.getElementById. And we want to give it that same ID that we gave it in our HTML. So here we are, we have our div that we're giving an ID of items, and we're selecting that div via our JavaScript. So if I wanted to replace what goes inside here, I could literally go items element dot inner HTML equals, and then I would insert HTML here that I want. So now as you see, as our screen refreshes, we have our awesome here on the bottom. Okay, so that's pretty simple enough. So now what we need is we need to create an object of items, and we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to have a first name and a last name. And now we're just going to copy this and insert a couple of more objects. Okay, so we have our fake data. So the next step here is to create a HTML template that's going to make use of this data. And it's going to be a function that's going to take items, or let's just call it data, and it's going to return our string literal HTML. So we're going to make this inside a div. And to keep it simple, we're just going to have an h1 for the name, and H3 for the last name. Okay, so now that we have our template, we need to create a function that when called is going to iterate through the data and insert that data into our template and then push that template inside this inner HTML. So let's create a function. And so the first thing we want to do is let's move this inside our function. Now let's create a variable to hold our HTML. And what we want to do, we want to pass the data into this function. So what we want to do, we want to pass items into this function, and we want to map through those items to generate our HTML. So for each item, we want to return our HTML template passing that item. So now we have the element that we're targeting in this div. We have our map function that iterates through the items and saves all that data into HTML data. Now the last part is we want to insert this into our HTML. And the last step for us is to call this function. Let's comment this out because we don't need it anymore, or we could delete it completely. So now the last step is to call that function with our data. And we want to pass our fake data. Okay, so this is where you could see that spelling is important. So let's see where I messed up. HTML template is not defined. So generate HTML template. Here we go. Template. Nice. And here we go. And so here's the thing, we have our list, and it's basically what we did in the other example, just much simplified. Now as you could see here, we have the comma here, we have a comma here, we have a comma here, we have a comma here. Why is that happening? Well, that's because, as we mentioned before, we don't want to return an array of objects separated by commas. We want to return a single string. So to fix this, all we have to do here is to add our .join method. And instead of a comma, we want to separate it with no space. So as you could see now, we have our elements: Paul Bratz, Mike Jones, Joan Mike, Brett Wolf, just like we expected. So the challenge for you guys, if you want to accept it, is see if you could follow this pattern, create your own HTML template, possibly using images or whatever you like, and generate your own dynamic content. So before we end here, let's quickly review. Step 1, we have the data that we want to show. Step 2, we create a template to push that data into. Step 3, we create a function, and we want to make sure that we target the div where we want to insert that HTML, and then we create a variable to hold all the items that we map through using the .map array method, and we push that into our div using inner HTML. And the final step is to call that function. And here we are. We learned today how to generate HTML with JavaScript. I hope you guys liked it, and let me know in the comments any other ideas for the stuff that you guys want to see. Hey guys, so that was it. Thank you for watching. I just want to say it's really nice for me to have you guys to be able to share what I'm learning, and hopefully what I'm demonstrating here is helping you guys. So once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.